The radio crackled with static before the voice came through, weak and shredded by pain. "We left her on that mountain." The words hung in the cold air of the debriefing room, heavy with shame. "We told her she couldn't keep up. We said she'd slow us down. We left her behind and climbed into hell without looking back." A pause, labored breathing. Her name was Sergeant Colton Brennan, and this is the story of how one woman alone on a frozen peak, with nothing but her father's rifle and her iron will, held back an entire enemy force, while the men who abandoned her fought for their lives below. The transmission ended. Silence filled the room, and somewhere in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, a different kind of storm was just beginning. 48 hours earlier, the Montana sky stretched endless and blue over the Bitterroot Range, the kind of sky that made a person feel small and significant all at once. Wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water, and somewhere high above, an eagle traced lazy circles against the sun. Colton Brennan was 10 years old and her hands were cold. She stood on the ridgeline behind her family's ranch, her father's M24 rifle resting on a makeshift shooting platform built from stacked logs and sandbags. The weapon was almost as tall as she was, the stock worn smooth by years of use, the barrel cold and unforgiving under her small fingers. Her father knelt beside her, his face weathered and kind, his ranger tab visible on the shoulder of his faded BDU jacket. "Remember what I told you about breathing," Sergeant Major Tom Brennan said quietly. Colton nodded, her eye pressed to the scope. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let your heart rate settle. Don't fight the rifle. Become part of it." She breathed. In, out. The crosshairs steadied on a target 800 meters down the valley, a rusted oil drum painted white against the brown grass. "Mountains don't forgive mistakes, Colt." Her father continued, his voice steady and sure. "Neither do bullets. You miss, someone dies. You hesitate, someone dies. You panic, someone dies. So you don't do any of those things. You breathe, you aim, you squeeze." Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. "This rifle," he said, placing one hand on the stock, "carried me through Desert Storm. Saved my life more times than I can count. Someday when you're ready, it'll be yours, but only if you understand what it means to carry it." Colton's voice was small but clear. "What does it mean, Dad?" "It means you never quit. It means you finish the mission no matter what. And it means you never ever leave your people behind." She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 800 meters away, the oil drum rang like a bell. Her father smiled. "That's my girl." The memory faded as the C-130 hit another pocket of turbulence, jolting Colton back to the present. She opened her eyes. The cargo bay was dim and loud, filled with the constant roar of engines and the smell of hydraulic fluid and old canvas. 23 soldiers sat strapped into web seating along both sides of the fuselage, most of them dozing or lost in their own thoughts. Colton sat alone near the tail ramp, her M24 rifle cradled in her lap like a sleeping child. She was 29 now, lean and hard from years of mountain training and combat deployments. Her face had the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving things most people only read about. Dark blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, gray eyes that missed nothing, hands steady and scarred. The rifle in her arms was the same one from that Montana ridgeline 19 years ago. The same one her father had carried through 2 wars. The same one that had been shipped home with his personal effects after Helmand Province 2014, after an IED tore through his convoy and took him away forever. She hadn't cried at the funeral. She'd cleaned the rifle instead, checking every component, running patches through the barrel until they came out white, replacing the worn sling with a new one she'd sewn herself from paracord. If she kept the rifle perfect, maybe some part of him would stay alive. Across the cargo bay, a group of Navy SEALs sat clustered together, their gear stacked in precise piles at their feet. They were loud in that particular way combat veterans got when they were trying to prove something to each other, swapping stories and insults with the easy rhythm of men who'd bled together. One of them, a petty officer with a thick neck and a face like hammered leather, glanced in Colton's direction and said something to the man beside him. Both of them laughed. Colton didn't react. She'd learned a long time ago that silence was a kind of armor. Let them laugh, let them doubt. Words didn't matter, only the mission mattered. The loadmaster appeared from the forward section, moving hand over hand along the cargo netting. 15 minutes to drop zone, he shouted over the engine noise. Final gear check. Make sure your shit is tied down. The soldiers stirred, coming alert, checking straps and buckles and chamber flags. The SEAL who'd been laughing stood up and made his way down the length of the bay, stopping directly in front of Colton. Petty Officer Wade Kessler, 31 years old, team leader, eyes like flint. "You're the Army attachment," he said, not quite a question. Colton looked up at him. "Yes." "Brennan Wright sniper?" "Yes." Kessler studied her for a moment, his gaze dropping to the M24 in her lap. "That's an old weapon," he said. "We're running suppressed MK-13s on this op. Didn't they issue you something from this century?" "This rifle works fine," Colton said evenly. "Sure it does." Kessler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But this is a SEAL operation, Sergeant. We move fast, we move light, and we don't carry dead weight. If you can't keep pace, you stay at the fob. Clear." Colton met his stare without blinking. "Clear." "Good." He turned to walk away, then paused. "One more thing. We don't do participation trophies out here. You're on this mission because Command has a diversity quota to fill. Just try not to get in the way." He walked back to his team, and the laughter started again. Colton returned her attention to her rifle. Let them talk. The mountain would do her talking for her. The forward operating base squatted in a shallow valley like a collection of shipping containers and sandbags arranged by someone with no sense of aesthetics and a lot of sense about staying alive. Concrete barriers, razor wire guard towers. The American flag snapping in the wind above it all. The C-130 had landed 20 minutes ago, and now Colton stood in the staging area near the motor pool watching the SEALs prepare their gear with the kind of aggressive efficiency that came from years of doing the same thing over and over. They had everything: night vision rigs, suppressed weapons, high-end GPS units, 65-pound rucksacks loaded with enough equipment to sustain a small war. Colton's pack weighed 32 pounds. Rifle, ammunition, water, basic medical kit, nothing else. She didn't need anything else. A voice called out from behind her. "Brennan." She turned. A man in Ranger tab and Master Sergeant rank stood 10 feet away, his eyes sharp and assessing. He was older, maybe 52, with the kind of build that suggested he'd been carved out of something harder than normal flesh. Gray stubble, a scar running along his jawline. Master Sergeant Gage Thorne. "Yes, Master Sergeant," Colton said. Thorne walked closer, his gaze dropping to the rifle slung across her shoulder. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, "That's a Remington M24, Schmidt and Bender scope, custom stockwork. I know that rifle." Colton's expression didn't change. "Sir, I know it," Thorne repeated, "because I watched Tom Brennan carry it through Helmand in 2014. I watched him use it to cover our extraction when we got pinned down by a Taliban sniper team. And I watched them load it into a box with his other effects after the IED. Something flickered behind Colton's eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "You knew my father." "I did more than know him, Sergeant. He saved my life. Twice." Thorne stepped closer. "He was the finest ranger I ever served with. Taught me everything I know about mountain warfare, about patience, about finishing the mission no matter what." Colton swallowed. "He died doing that." "He did." Thorne's voice softened just slightly. "And I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd look out for his family. Didn't know he had a daughter following his footsteps until I saw you on the manifest for this op. I don't need looking after, Master Sergeant." "Didn't say you did." Thorne glanced toward the SEALs, then back to Colton. "But those boys over there are already counting you out. I can see it in the way they're moving. They think you are a liability. Let them think what they want." "Good answer." A ghost of a smile crossed Thorne's face. "Your father used to say the same thing. Then he'd go out and make believers out of everyone." He extended his hand. "You show them what a Brennan can do, Sergeant. Make them eat every word." Colton shook his hand. His grip was firm, callous, the grip of a man who'd spent decades holding rifles and ropes in the line between life and death. "I will, Master Sergeant." "I know you will." Thorne released her hand and stepped back. "And Brennan, when this is over, we should talk. I've got stories about your father you've probably never heard." "I'd like that, sir." Thorne nodded once and walked toward his own team, 5 Rangers clustered near a pair of Humvees checking weapons and gear with the quiet professionalism that marked the 75th Ranger Regiment. Colton watched him go, something warm and unfamiliar settling in her chest. Someone who'd known her father. Someone who remembered. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. The briefing tent smelled like canvas and coffee and the particular kind of nervous sweat that came before missions. 30 soldiers sat on folding chairs arranged in rows facing a map board. SEALs on the left side, Rangers on the right. A handful of support personnel scattered throughout. Colton sat in the back row, notebook, open pen ready. At the front of the tent, a captain from the intelligence section pointed at the map with a laser pointer. "Objective Raven's Perch," he said, tapping a contour line high on the map. "Elevation 8,100 feet. Grid coordinates November Victor 732456. This peak provides direct line-of-sight observation over the Khyber Valley approach, which intel suggests has been used by enemy forces to move supplies and personnel over the past 2 weeks." The laser pointer traced a route up the mountain. "Your mission is simple. Establish observation post at the summit. Maintain overwatch for 24 hours. Document any enemy movement. No direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. This is eyes-on only, gentlemen." Kessler raised his hand. "Sir, what's the threat assessment?" "Minimal," the captain replied. "Latest surveillance shows no enemy activity within 10 kilometers of the objective. Weather is clear, temperature is stable, and we have no indication of hostile forces in the area." "So it's a walk in the park," one of the SEALs muttered. "That's the assessment, yes. However, I want to emphasize that mountain operations carry inherent risks. Weather can change rapidly, terrain is unforgiving, and medical evacuation from that altitude is complicated. Treat this with the same level of caution you'd give any combat operation." Colton studied the map, her eyes tracing the approach route. Something felt wrong. The path the captain had outlined followed a series of switchbacks up the southern face of the mountain, moving through narrow defiles and exposed ridgelines. Classic ambush terrain. If she were planning to hit a team moving up that slope, she'd position shooters on the high ground, to the east and west, creating overlapping fields of fire with no cover for the targets below. She raised her hand. The captain looked surprised. "Yes, Sergeant." "Sir, the approach route crosses multiple choke points with limited cover. If enemy forces were in the area, this would be an ideal location for an ambush. Have we confirmed clear observation of those high points?" The captain's expression tightened slightly. "Satellite imagery shows no enemy presence, Sergeant. Intel is solid." "With respect, sir, satellite imagery can miss small teams in rocky terrain. Has anyone physically cleared those positions?" "That's what we're doing with this mission," the captain said, an edge creeping into his voice. "Your concern is noted, Sergeant Brennan, but the assessment stands. We have no reason to believe there's hostile activity on that mountain." Colton wanted to push back, wanted to point out that no reason to believe wasn't the same as certainty, but she knew how this worked. Officers didn't like junior NCOs questioning their intelligence briefs in front of a full room. She nodded. "Yes, sir." The briefing continued. Movement times, radio frequencies, medevac protocols. Colton copied it all into her notebook, but her eyes kept returning to the map, to the high points overlooking the route, to the places where death could wait patient and invisible. Across the tent, Thorne was looking at the same spots. When he caught Colton's eye, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He saw it too, and that made her feel both better and worse. Dawn came cold and pale, turning the frost on the trucks into a thin crust of silver. The Joint Task Force assembled in the staging area, breath fogging in the mountain air, weapons slung and ready. 14 SEALs, 5 Rangers, 1 Army sniper, 20 soldiers preparing to climb into terrain that didn't care about rank or branch or how many deployments anyone had survived. Colton stood near the tailgate of a Humvee, performing her final weapons check with the kind of methodical precision her father had drilled into her until it became second nature. Magazine seated, chamber clear, optic lens clean, parallax adjusted for distance, elevation turret zeroed. She was so focused on the rifle that she didn't notice the SEALs gathering nearby until their voices rose just loud enough to carry. "Look at her," one of them said. "Probably spent all night polishing that relic. Think she's ever actually shot anyone?" "Doubt it. This is probably her first real mission. Command's just checking a box." Senior Chief Dalton Hayes, a man built like a brick wall with eyes that had seen too much, shook his head slowly. Dead weight should have kept her back at the fob. Kessler's voice cut through. Agreed, but we're stuck with her now. Just keep her in the back of the formation. If she can't keep up, we leave her at the first ridge point. More laughter, quiet and mean. Colton didn't look up, didn't react, didn't give them the satisfaction. Her hands continued their work, checking each component, ensuring everything was perfect. Because perfect meant alive, and alive meant finishing the mission. 30 feet away, the Rangers stood beside their own vehicles, adjusting straps and tightening bootlaces. Sergeant First Class Reed Blackwell, the team medic, glanced toward the SEALs and then at Thorne. Should we say something? Thorne watched Colton for a moment. She stood completely still, except for her hands, which moved over the rifle with the confidence of someone who'd performed this ritual 10,000 times. No, Thorne said quietly. She doesn't need us to fight her battles. They're being assholes. They are. And when this is over, they're going to learn something about underestimating people. Thorne slung his own rifle across his chest. I've seen that look before, that focus, that calm. Her father had it too. Think she's ready for this. Thorne's eyes never left Colton. Think she's been ready her whole life. She just doesn't know it yet. The team leader, a lieutenant, called out across the staging area. Mount up, we move in 5. The soldiers began climbing into vehicles. Colton secured her rifle and shouldered her pack, the weight settling comfortably across her shoulders and hips. 32 pounds, light enough to move fast, heavy enough to survive. She took one last look at the mountain rising above them, its peak hidden in clouds that weren't supposed to be there according to the weather brief. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. Mountains don't forgive mistakes. Colton climbed into the back of the Humvee. Time to see if she'd learned the lesson. The vehicles drove as far as the terrain allowed, grinding up a dirt track that turned into little more than a goat path, then stopped at a flat area where the mountain became too steep for wheels. Everyone dismounted. The SEALs moved with loud confidence, slamming doors, adjusting their heavy packs with grunts and curses, making jokes about the altitude and the cold and the general misery of mountain operations. The Rangers moved quietly, efficiently, wasting no energy on talk. Colton stood apart from both groups, studying the slope above. The route started gentle enough, a series of switchbacks through scrub pine and loose scree. But higher up, she could see where it steepened dramatically, the rock faces turning vertical, the vegetation disappearing entirely. 8,000 feet of elevation gain, in terrain that could kill you a dozen different ways if you weren't careful. Kessler called out, his voice carrying across the staging area. Listen up. We move in formation. SEALs take point, Rangers in the middle, Army attachment in the rear. Army attachment, not even her name. Colton slung her rifle and adjusted her pack straps. Fine. Let them forget her name. The mountain would remember it for them. The column began to move. The first hour was easy. The path wound upward through scattered trees, the grade manageable, the footing solid. The SEALs set a punishing pace, their boots hammering the ground, their gear clanking with every step. Too loud, Colton thought. Awed. Too fast. Mountains demanded respect. You didn't charge up them. You moved with them, finding the rhythm of the slope, breathing with the altitude, conserving energy for when you'd need it most. But she didn't say anything. She simply followed her own steps, nearly silent, her breathing controlled and unsteady. Behind her, she could hear the Rangers moving with similar, quiet discipline. 2 hours in, the terrain changed. The trees thinned and disappeared. The path narrowed to barely wider than a boot length, cut into the side of a steep slope, with nothing but air on one side and rock wall on the other. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 10 minutes. Wind began to pick up, gusting from the northeast, carrying the smell of snow. That wasn't supposed to happen. The weather brief had promised clear skies and stable conditions. Colton glanced at the clouds rolling in from the east, thick and dark and moving fast. Someone had gotten the forecast very, very wrong. Ahead, the SEALs were starting to slow. Their heavy packs built for sustained operations were becoming liabilities on the narrow trail. Several of them were breathing hard, the altitude stealing oxygen from lungs not quite acclimated. One SEAL, a younger operator named Jensen, stepped wrong on a patch of ice hidden beneath a thin layer of dust. His boot slipped. He pitched sideways toward the drop-off arms, windmilling, a shout caught in his throat. Colton reacted without thinking. 3 fast steps. Her hand shot out, catching the drag handle on the back of his plate carrier. She planted her feet, leaned back, and arrested his fall with a sharp jerk that nearly pulled her own shoulder out of socket. Jensen scrambled back onto the path, eyes wide, chest heaving. For a moment they stood there, Colton still gripping his gear, the wind howling around them. Then Jensen yanked himself free, his face flushing red. "I had it." "Sure," Colton said quietly. "I didn't need your help." She said nothing, just stepped back and let him pass. Behind him, Hayes and Kessler had stopped watching. "She's already slowing us down," Hayes muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Shouldn't even be up here." Kessler looked at Colton, then at the narrowing path ahead, then back at Hayes. Some decision crystallized behind his eyes. He keyed his radio. "All elements, this is SEAL 1. We're approaching the upper ridge. Terrain is getting technical. We need to streamline the team." A pause, then, "Army attachment will hold at the next flat point. We'll link up on the way down." Colton felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the wind. They were going to leave her. Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. "SEAL 1, this is Viper 6. Recommend we keep the team consolidated. Weather's turning." "Negative, Viper 6. This is a SEAL operation. We'll proceed with core team only." Thorne didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was tight. "Understood." The column continued moving. 15 minutes later, they reached a small shelf of rock barely large enough for 3 people to stand. The path beyond it disappeared into a wall of fog that had rolled in with unnatural speed. Kessler stopped and turned to face Colton. "This is your whole point, the sergeant," he said, not unkindly but with absolute finality. "Wait here. We'll come back this way in 24 hours." Colton looked at him. "Sir, the weather is within acceptable parameters. We've got this. The approach above this point is exposed. If there's—" "Sergeant," Kessler's voice hardened, "you've done your part. Now let us do ours." Clear. The other SEALs were already moving past, disappearing into the fog one by one, their shapes becoming ghosts, then shadows, then nothing at all. Hayes was the last to pass. He paused for just a moment, looked at Colton with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt, and said, "You tried. No shame in that." Then he was gone too. The Rangers came through next. Thorne stopped in front of Colton. His jaw was clenched, so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "It's their operation," Colton replied. "It's a shit decision made by a shit officer who's too proud to listen." Thorne looked up at the fog. "Weather's not right. Intel's not right. Something about this whole thing feels off." "I know. You feel it too." Colton nodded. Thorne was quiet for a moment. "Then if things go sideways up there, you get yourself down this mountain. Don't wait for us. Don't be a hero. You get to safety. Your father would want that." "My father," Colton said softly, "never left his people behind." Thorne's expression shifted. Something like pride flickered across his face. "No," he agreed, "he didn't." He placed one hand on her shoulder, squeezed once, and then followed his team into the fog. And just like that, Colton was alone. She stood on the small shelf of rock, the wind pulling at her clothes, the fog swirling around her like something alive. Below, the path she'd climbed disappeared into distance. Above, the mountain waited. For a long moment, Colton didn't move. Then she unslung her rifle, performed a quick function check, and made a decision that would change everything. She stepped off the shelf and continued climbing. Not because anyone had ordered her to, not because she had something to prove, but because her instincts were screaming that the men who'd left her were walking into something they didn't see coming. And a Brennan never left her people behind, even if they'd left her first. The fog turned the world into something unreal. Colton moved through it like a ghost, her boots finding purchase on rock. She could barely see her hands reading the terrain through touch, as much as sight. The M24 rode across her back, its familiar weight a comfort in the disorienting white. She'd been climbing for 40 minutes since the SEALs abandoned her. The path, if it could still be called a path, had narrowed to barely 18 inches wide, cut into the side of a near-vertical rock face. To her left, stone. To her right, nothing but balm and the promise of a 1,000-foot drop. Normal people would have turned back. But Colton had grown up on mountains like this, had spent her childhood navigating terrain that would make grown men weep. Her father had taken her into the Bitterroots every weekend, teaching her to read stone and snow and wind, teaching her that mountains were dangerous but honest. They didn't lie, they didn't pretend. They simply were. And right now, this mountain was telling her something was wrong. The wind had shifted. It was coming from the wrong direction, carrying sounds that didn't belong. She paused, pressing herself against the rock wall and listened. Voices, faint, speaking a language that wasn't English, and the metallic click of rifle bolts being worked. Colton's blood went cold. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Viper 6, this is Brennan. I'm hearing enemy voices approximately 100 meters above my position. Multiple contacts, armed, request immediate. Static, pure white noise that hurt her ears. She tried again. Viper 6, Seal 1, any station this net. This is Brennan. Enemy contact. I say again, enemy contact on nothing but static. They were jamming communications, which meant this wasn't a chance encounter. This was planned, coordinated, an ambush, and the SEALs had walked straight into it. Colton's mind raced. She could turn back, get to safety, report what she'd heard and let command handle it, or she could keep climbing. She thought about her father, about the Silver Star citation she'd read so many times she had it memorized, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving with the 75th Ranger Regiment. When his team came under effective enemy fire, Sergeant Major Brennan voluntarily exposed himself to hostile fire in order to direct covering fire, enabling the evacuation of wounded personnel. His actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. He'd run toward the danger, not away from it. Colton took a breath, checked her rifle one more time, and continued climbing. The fog began to thin as she gained altitude, and then suddenly she emerged onto a plateau. The summit. What she saw there stopped her heart. SEAL gear was scattered across the rocky ground like debris from an explosion. Rucksacks torn open, contents spilled. A helmet with a bullet hole through the crown. Spent brass casings glittering in the weak sunlight breaking through the clouds. Blood, dark and frozen in pools between the rocks. Colton moved forward in a crouch, rifle raised, scanning for threats. The plateau was maybe 60 meters across, ringed by rock formations that provided natural cover. Good defensive terrain, except the defense had failed. She found the first body 30 feet from the center of the plateau. Enemy fighter, AK-47 lying beside him. 2 bullet holes center mass. Whoever had shot him knew what they were doing, but one enemy dead meant there had been more. Colton moved to the eastern edge of the plateau and looked down. Her stomach dropped. 120 meters below, in a natural bowl of rock, the SEALs were pinned down. She could see them through her scope. 12 men pressed into whatever cover they could find, weapons up, returning sporadic fire at positions Colton couldn't quite make out. One man, she thought it was Jensen, wasn't moving. Dark stains on the rocks around him. And now she understood. The SEALs had reached the summit and been hit by a prepared ambush. They'd fought back but been forced to retreat down the far side of the peak into that bowl where they were now trapped. And the enemy held the high ground. Colton scanned the terrain with her scope, moving slowly, looking for there. 340 meters to her northeast, a rock formation with an excellent sightline to the trapped SEALs, and just barely visible the outline of a figure in a ghillie suit. Enemy sniper. Position 1, she kept scanning. Position 2, 290 meters almost due north. Another height, another shape. Position 3, 410 meters northwest. This one was watching a different angle, covering an escape route the SEALs might try to use. 3 enemy snipers perfectly positioned with probably 10 to 15 support infantry scattered around the peak. And down in that bowl, 12 Americans with no way out. Colton's breathing steadied. Her heart rate dropped. Everything her father had taught her, everything she'd learned through countless hours on the range and in the mountains, came together in this single moment. She could leave. Should leave. This wasn't her fight anymore. They'd left her behind, but that wasn't how Brennan's worked. Colton moved to a position behind a large boulder that gave her a stable shooting platform and clear sight lines to all 3 enemy positions. She unfolded the bipod on her M24 and settled the rifle against her shoulder. Her notebook came out of her pocket. She'd need to log every shot, distance, wind, conditions, because professionals documented their work. And Colton Brennan was about to remind everyone what professional looked like. She ranged position 3 first. 410 meters. The longest shot, the hardest shot, but also the most important shot, because that sniper was watching the one route the SEALs might use to escape. Colton's mind became a calculator. Range 410 meters, wind northeast at 9 miles per hour, gusting to 12. Temperature 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Altitude 8,100 feet. Air density reduced. Bullets fly farther but less stable. Ammunition, 300 Winchester Magnum, 190 grain Sierra Match King. Ballistic coefficient, 533. Muzzle velocity, 2, 850 feet per second. She ran the numbers in her head. Elevation, 16.2 minutes of angle. Windage, 2.1 minutes right to compensate for the crosswind. Coriolis effect at this latitude, 0.3 minutes. Her fingers adjusted the turrets on her scope. Click, click, click. Each adjustment precise and deliberate. She settled into her shooting position. Cheek weld firm, eye relief perfect, breathing controlled. Through the scope, she could see the enemy sniper shifting slightly, adjusting his own aim toward the trap seals. Colton's finger rested on the trigger. In, out. In, out. Her heartbeat slowed to 48 beats per minute. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the target in the space between breaths. Her father's voice clear, as if he were standing beside her. Don't think. Don't hope. Just do. Colton squeezed the trigger. The rifle punched back against her shoulder. 410 meters away, the enemy sniper's head snapped back. He collapsed behind his rock. And suddenly the mountain understood. A Brennan was here, and the fight had just begun. The sound of the shot echoed across the mountain like a crack in the sky itself. For one perfect second, everything stopped. Then chaos erupted. The enemy fighters who'd been carefully positioned around the peak suddenly scrambled for cover, shouting to each other in voices sharp with confusion and fear. They'd been the hunters. Now something had changed the equation. Now there was another predator on the mountain. Colton didn't wait to see the results of her first shot. The moment the rifle recoiled, she was already moving, sliding backward from her position behind the boulder, keeping low, using the terrain to mask her movement. First rule of snipercraft drilled into her until it became instinct. Never shoot twice from the same position. The enemy would have marked her muzzle flash. Within seconds, they'd saturate that spot with return fire. Only amateurs stayed put to admire their work. And Colton Brennan was not an amateur. She moved 30 meters to the north, finding new cover behind a tumble of rocks that gave her a different angle on the battlefield. Her boots made almost no sound on the stone. Her breathing stayed controlled. Every movement was deliberate, wasting no energy, drawing no attention. Through her scope, she could see the remaining two enemy snipers repositioning, scanning the ridgeline, trying to locate her. They were looking too low. They expected her to be at the same elevation as the trapped seals shooting from a supported position in the bowl. They hadn't considered that someone might be above them shooting down. Their mistake. Colton ranged position 2, 290 meters. Slight upward angle from her new location. Wind had shifted now, coming more directly from the east at 11 miles per hour. She adjusted her scope, calculated, breathed. The target moved slightly, exposing his shoulder as he scanned with his own optic. Colton's finger tightened on the trigger. The M24 spoke again. 290 meters away, the enemy sniper jerked violently and tumbled forward out of his hide, rolling down the slope before coming to rest against a boulder. 2 shots, 2 kills. But now they knew where she was. The crack of rifles filled the air as enemy fighters opened fire on her position. Bullets whined off the rocks around her, sending chips of stone spinning through the air. The sound was enormous, overwhelming, the kind of noise that made people freeze or panic. Colton did neither. She was already moving again, this time, angling east, using a narrow cleft in the rock face to shield her movement. Rounds impacted where she'd been 3 seconds ago, tearing up the ground, accomplishing nothing. She counted the shots by sound. AK-47s mostly. 7.62 by 39. Effective range maybe 300 meters. They were shooting from positions 400 meters away, wasting ammunition, betraying their locations. Good. Colton found her next position behind a natural rock parapet that gave her excellent cover and a clean line of sight to position 1, the last enemy sniper, 340 meters. Wind gusting to 14 miles per hour now, temperature dropping as the storm moved in. Through her scope, she could see him clearly, older than the others, gray in his beard, moving with the kind of calm that spoke of experience. This one was dangerous. He'd stopped scanning for her. Instead, he'd gone completely still, his rifle trained on a fixed point, waiting. He knew she'd have to expose herself to take the shot. And when she did, he'd be ready. A duel then. Two snipers, one mountain, only one winner. Colton settled into her position, checking her data. Range, wind, elevation. She ran through the calculations twice, making sure. 340 meters. Elevation adjustment, 13.8 minutes. Wind, 2.4 minutes right. Her finger rested on the trigger. But she didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, she waited, watching the enemy sniper through her scope, studying his position, his angle, his setup. He was good. Very good. His hide was professionally constructed. His rifle, she thought it was a Dragunov SVD, was perfectly positioned. But he'd made one small mistake. A tiny piece of his scope lens was catching the weak sunlight, creating a barely visible glint. Colton smiled. She shifted her aim slightly, targeting not the man, but the optic itself. Breathed in, out, out. Heart rate steady at 46 beats per minute. Squeezed. The rifle bucked. 340 meters away, the enemy sniper's scope exploded in a shower of glass and metal fragments. The man jerked back, his hands flying to his face, blood streaming between his fingers. Not a kill shot, but he was out of the fight. Blind, wounded, no longer a threat. Colton was already repositioning when the radio crackled to life in her ear. Static at first. Then a voice rough with pain and surprise. Ghost Actual Seal 1. Who the hell is shooting? Colton keyed her mic. Seal 1, this is Brennan. I have you visual. 3 enemy snipers neutralized, multiple infantry still active on the ridgeline. A long pause. Then Kessler's voice, disbelief clear even through the radio distortion. Brennan, you're supposed to be... I know where I'm supposed to be, sir, but you walked into an ambush, and I'm the only friendly with elevation and clear sight lines. Recommend you consolidate your position and prepare to move when I give you an opening. Another pause. She could almost hear him processing this, trying to reconcile the woman they dismissed and abandoned with the sniper who'd just taken out 3 enemy shooters in less than 4 minutes. Copy that, Kessler finally said. We have 1 critical casualty. Jensen took rounds to the abdomen. Internal bleeding. He needs medevac within 30 minutes or we lose him. 30 minutes. Colton glanced at the sky. The storm was moving in fast clouds, of dropping visibility decreasing. No medevac helicopter was going to risk flying in these conditions, which meant Jensen's only chance was getting him down the mountain to a lower elevation where extraction was possible. And the only thing standing between the SEALs and that escape route was approximately 10 enemy fighters scattered across the peak. Understood, Colton said. Give me 5 minutes. She moved again, this time heading west along the ridgeline, using the terrain to mask her profile. Her pack felt light on her back. 32 pounds. 60% of that was ammunition. 47 rounds remaining. 10 enemy fighters. The math was acceptable. Ahead, she could see 2 enemy soldiers positioned behind a rock formation, their attention focused down toward the trapped SEALs. They were maybe 185 meters from her position, both carrying AK-47s. Both wearing load-bearing vests that suggested they were infantry, not snipers, not professionals. Colton took up a position, ranged them quickly, and fired twice in rapid succession. The first man dropped without a sound. The second spun toward her, bringing his rifle up, and took her second round through the chest. Both down, she repositioned before the echoes faded. Somewhere below, she heard shouting. The enemy was beginning to understand they had a serious problem. Their carefully planned ambush was falling apart. A group of 3 fighters appeared from behind a ridge, moving fast, trying to flank toward her last shooting position. Colton tracked the lead man. Range 220 meters. Moving target. Uphill run. Speed maybe 3 miles per hour. Lead the target. Account for the climb angle. Compensate for movement. She fired. The lead man fell. The other 2 dove for cover. Colton adjusted her aim, waiting for one of them to expose himself. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Movement. A head and shoulders appearing from behind a boulder. She fired. The figure jerked and disappeared. The third man broke from cover, running back the way he'd come, abandoning his position. Colton let him go. Fleeing enemies didn't shoot back. Her radio crackled. Brennan, this is Viper 6. Thorne's voice tight with controlled urgency. We're hearing the firefight. What's your status? I'm on the summit, Master Sergeant. Engaging enemy forces that have SEAL element pinned down. Multiple enemy KIA. I'm trying to clear them a route out. Copy. How many enemy remaining? Colton scanned the area, counting probable positions. Estimate 5 to 7 fighters still active, but they're disorganized. Breaking contact. We're climbing to your position, Thorne said. ETA 45 minutes. Negative Viper 6. You won't make it in time. Jensen is critical. SEALs need to move now, or he dies. Silence on the other end. Then understood. We'll reposition to intercept their descent route. Brennan, a pause. Don't do anything stupid. No promises, Master Sergeant. She heard what might have been a laugh. Your father said the same thing right before he did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. The transmission ended. Colton moved again, working her way around the western edge of the plateau. She needed to create a corridor, a safe route the SEALs could use to extract from the bowl without getting cut down, and she needed to do it fast. Ahead, she spotted 2 more enemy fighters taking up position behind a cluster of boulders. They were setting up what looked like a PKM machine gun, the barrel pointing down toward the bowl where the SEALs were trapped. If they got that weapon operational, it would shred anyone trying to move through the open ground. Colton ranged them, 315 meters, both targets partially concealed. Wind now gusting erratically as the storm front arrived. Difficult shot, very difficult. She steadied her breathing, calculated the hold, and fired at the man feeding the ammunition belt into the gun. He collapsed backward. The second man dove sideways, scrambling for his rifle. Colton tracked him, led him slightly, and squeezed the trigger. The man stopped moving. The machine gun sat silent, unmanned, useless. Colton keyed her radio. SEAL 1 Western approach is clear. You have a window. Move now. Copy. Displacing. Through her scope, she watched the SEALs begin their movement. They moved in bounds, 3 men providing cover, while 4 moved with Jensen on an improvised litter. Then the group switched. Leapfrogging. Professional. They were 50 meters up the slope when the enemy fighters who'd fled earlier regrouped and opened fire from new positions. Rounds kicked up dirt around the SEALs. One man stumbled, hit in the leg, but kept moving. Colton searched for the source of the fire. There. 2 men. Eastern Ridge, 430 meters, firing from behind inadequate cover because they were panicking, making mistakes. She adjusted her scope for the distance and fired twice. Both men fell silent. The SEALs kept moving. Colton scanned for more threats, her scope sweeping across the broken terrain, looking for any sign of enemy activity. Movement caught her eye. A figure emerging from a cave entrance she hadn't noticed before. Then another. And another. Her stomach sank. There weren't 5 to 7 enemy fighters remaining. There were at least 12 more. A reserve force, hidden, waiting, and they were all moving toward the SEALs' escape route. Colton did the math in her head. 12 targets, 28 rounds remaining. Against a group that was now alert, organized, and angry, this was going to be close. She keyed her team. SEAL 1, you have reinforcements coming from the northeast. 12 plus fighters. I'm going to try to slow them down, but you need to move faster. We're moving as fast as we can with a litter casualty. Then move faster than that. Colton shifted positions again, this time to a spot that gave her a sight line along the approach route the enemy would have to use. A choke point, narrow path between 2 rock walls. They'd have to funnel through their single file. It was the perfect kill zone. She settled behind her rifle and waited. The first enemy fighter appeared in her scope. Then the second. Then a third. They were moving fast, weapons up, clearly trying to get ahead of the SEALs to cut them off. Colton let them enter the choke point. Let them commit. When 6 men were in the narrow passage with rock walls on either side, she fired. The lead man dropped. The man behind him froze, confused. Colton fired again, and again, and again. Methodical, precise. Each shot carefully aimed and deliberately placed. The choke point became a killing ground. Men fell, others tried to retreat. One attempted to climb the rock wall and took a round through the shoulder that sent him tumbling back down. In 15 seconds, Colton fired 9 shots. 7 men went down. The remaining fighters broke and ran, abandoning the attack, fleeing back toward the cave entrance. Colton's hands were steady as she reloaded her fingers, working automatically, muscle memory from 10,000 repetitions on the range. 19 rounds remaining. Her left shoulder throbbed where the rifle recoil was bruising tissue already sore from the climb. Her trigger finger ached. Her eyes burned from staring through the scope. But none of that mattered. The SEALs were still moving, still alive. That was all that mattered. Her radio crackled with Kessler's voice. Brennan, we're clear of immediate contact. Heading down the western slope. You need to extract. Get off that mountain. Negative. Still have enemy forces active. I'll cover your descent. That's not a request, Sergeant. You've done enough. Get yourself to safety. Colton didn't respond. She was scanning the terrain again, looking for any sign that the enemy was regrouping for another attempt. There, on the far ridge, a single figure standing in the open looking directly at her position through binoculars. Not a sniper, not a fighter, a commander. Observing, assessing. Through her scope, Colton could see him clearly. Older, 50s maybe, gray beard, face weathered by years of mountain warfare. He lowered the binoculars and looked directly at her. Even at this distance, she felt the weight of his gaze. He raised one hand in what might have been a salute, or an acknowledgement, or a promise. Then he turned and disappeared down the far side of the ridge, followed by the remaining fighters. They were withdrawing, breaking contact. The battle was over. Colton lowered her rifle, her entire body suddenly shaking with adrenaline, crash, and exhaustion. Her hands trembled as she logged the final shots in her notebook. 43 rounds fired, 14 confirmed enemy KIA, another 8 probable hits, 3 wounded neutralizations, against a prepared ambush force holding superior terrain with superior numbers. And she'd won. No, they'd won because the SEALs were alive. Jensen still had a chance. The mission had failed, but the men had survived. That was victory enough. Colton stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and looked down at the carnage scattered across the plateau. Spent brass casings glittered in the weak light. Blood stained the rocks. The smell of gunpowder hung in the cold air. This was what her father had done. This was what the rifle had been made for. Not for glory, not for recognition, for bringing people home alive. She shouldered her pack and began making her way down from the summit, following the route the SEALs had taken. She'd gone maybe 200 meters when she heard voices ahead. American voices. She rounded a boulder and found herself face to face with Thorne and Team Viper. All 5 Rangers had their weapons up, scanning for threats, moving with the kind of intense alertness that came from hearing a firefight and running toward it. Thorne saw her and stopped. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Blackwell, the medic, let out a low whistle. Holy shit! Thorne walked forward slowly, his eyes taking in Colton's appearance. Her uniform was covered in rock dust and gunpowder residue. Her left shoulder was dark with bruising visible through her torn sleeve. Her hands were scraped raw from climbing and repositioning over rough stone. But her rifle was clean. Her eyes were clear, and she was still standing. How many? Thorne asked quietly. 14 confirmed. Maybe 8 more probable. Alone? Yes, Master Sergeant. How long? 5 hours, maybe 5.5. Thorne shook his head slowly, something like awe in his expression. Your father held off a Taliban assault force for 3 hours in Helmand, saved 18 Rangers. I thought that was the most impressive thing I'd ever see. He paused. You just broke his record. Colton felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd been holding in place for 10 years, since the day they'd handed her that folded flag and the rifle and nothing else that mattered. Her eyes burned, but she blinked the tears back. He would have done better, she said quietly. No, Thorne replied. He wouldn't have. You fought smart, repositioned constantly, made every shot count. That's not just skill, Sergeant. That's art. Blackwell stepped forward. You're injured. Let me look at that shoulder. It's just bruising. The SEALs have a critical casualty. They need you more. We're already coordinating with them. They're 200 meters below us, moving to the extraction point. Medevac is inbound ETA 20 minutes. Blackwell pulled out his medical kit anyway, which means I have time to look at you whether you like it or not. Colton wanted to argue, but her body chose that moment to betray her. Her legs buckled slightly, and Thorne caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy, he said. Adrenaline crash. It happens. I'm fine. You held a mountain for 5 hours against a superior force. You're allowed to not be fine for a few minutes. Blackwell examined her shoulder with practiced efficiency, his fingers probing the bruising, checking for breaks or separations. Severe contusion, probably partially torn rotator cuff. You shouldn't have been able to keep shooting with this. I had people to cover, Colton said simply. The medic shook his head, applying a field dressing. You Rangers are all crazy, present company included. She's not a Ranger, one of the other team members pointed out. Thorne looked at Colton for a long moment. She is today. He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a tan beret with the Ranger scroll attached. This was your father's, Thorne said. He gave it to me before his last deployment, told me to hold on to it until I found someone worthy of carrying the legacy. He held it out to her. I think we found that person. Colton stared at the beret, her father's, the one he'd worn through 2 wars and countless missions. She took it with shaking hands. Thank you, Master Sergeant. Thank you, Sergeant Brennan, for reminding us what right looks like. The sound of rotor blades began to echo up from the valley below. The medevac bird coming in under the weather, risking the wind and the altitude to pull Jensen out. Thorne keyed his radio. All Viper elements were moving to link up with SEAL element. Brennan, you're with us. And Brennan? Yes, Master Sergeant. When we get down there, those SEALs are going to have some things to say to you, some apologies to make. He paused. How you handle that is up to you, but know this, you don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them anything. What you did up here, that was for the mission, for Jensen, not for the men who left you behind. Colton thought about that as they began descending the mountain, about forgiveness and duty and what it meant to be a professional, about her father and the legacy she carried, about the rifle on her back and the men it had saved today. By the time they reached the extraction point, she knew what she was going to say. The SEALs were gathered in a tight perimeter around Jensen, who was being loaded onto the medevac helicopter by the flight medic. The rest of them stood in various states of exhaustion and injury, their faces hollow with shock and relief and something darker. Shame. Kessler saw Colton approaching and walked forward to meet her. His face was gray with fatigue. Blood stained his uniform from helping carry Jensen. His eyes, so confident and dismissive 12 hours ago, were different now. He stopped 3 feet from her and stood at attention. Sergeant Brennan, he said, his voice rough. On behalf of myself and my team, I need to say something. Colton waited. We were wrong about you, about your capabilities, about everything. He swallowed hard. We judged you before you proved yourself. We dismissed you because of prejudice and arrogance. And we left you behind when you warned us about danger we were too stupid to see. Behind him, the other SEALs stood silently watching. Hayes stepped forward. You had every right to turn around, to save yourself, to let us face the consequences of our own bad decisions. His voice broke slightly. But you didn't. You climbed into hell and fought for us anyway. And Jensen's alive because of it. We all are. Kessler reached into his pocket and pulled out his SEAL trident pin. The gold insignia caught the light gleaming. This represents everything I've worked for, everything I value. It's the most sacred thing I own. He held it out to her. And you've earned it more than I have today. One by one, the other SEALs came forward, each one removing something meaningful. Challenge coins, patches, insignia pins, creating a small pile in Colton's hands. She looked down at the collection of symbols, each one representing years of training and sacrifice and brotherhood. Then she looked up at Kessler. I didn't do it for recognition, she said quietly. I did it because it was the mission, because Jensen needed help, because that's what we're supposed to do for each other. I know, Kessler said, which makes it even more humbling. Colton held the items for a moment longer, then carefully handed them back. Keep these, she said. They're yours. You earned them through your own blood and sweat. What happened today doesn't take that away. She paused. But remember this feeling, this moment, the next time you're tempted to judge someone before they've had a chance to prove themselves. Hayes stepped forward. We will, I swear it. Good. Colton glanced at the helicopter where Jensen was being secured. How is he critical but stable? Blackwell reported. Flight medic says if he'd been delayed another 10 minutes, he wouldn't have made it. 10 minutes. The difference between life and death, measured in Colton's rifle shots, in her willingness to climb when she should have retreated, in her father's lessons about never leaving people behind. The helicopter lifted off its rotors, beating the air and carrying Jensen towards surgery and survival. The rest of them began the long walk back to base. Kessler fell into step beside Colton. They walked in silence for a while before he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Up there, when you were alone, outnumbered, low on ammunition, what kept you fighting? What kept you from breaking?" Colton thought about her answer for a long moment. "My father told me something before his last deployment," she finally said. "He told me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing the job anyway. It's about the moment when everything inside you is screaming to run, to hide, to save yourself, and you stay anyway because someone needs you to." She paused, looking up at the mountain peak behind them, now shrouded in clouds and falling snow. "I was terrified up there," she admitted. "Every time I took a shot, every time I repositioned, I thought it might be the last thing I ever did. But Jensen was dying, you were all trapped, and someone had to do something. So you did. So I did." They walked on through the gathering storm, the wind pushing at them, the temperature dropping as night approached. Behind them, Thorne and his rangers maintained a security perimeter, watching their backs ready for anything. Ahead, the lights of the fob were just beginning to appear in the distance, small and warm against the darkness. Colton adjusted the rifle on her shoulder, feeling its familiar weight, its constant presence. Her father's rifle. Her rifle now. And on the mountain behind them, scattered across the rocks and snow, was the evidence of what happened when people underestimated a Brennan. 14 enemy fighters who'd learned too late. 12 Americans who'd learned just in time. And one woman who'd proven that mountains didn't care who you were, only what you could do. The forward operating base looked different when they arrived back. Or maybe Colton was the one who changed. The convoy of Humvees rolled through the main gate just after sunset, their headlights cutting through the dust that hung perpetually in the air. Soldiers going about their evening routines stopped and stared as the vehicles passed. Word had already spread. Radio chatter moved faster than any convoy. One woman, one rifle, 5 hours, 14 confirmed kills. The numbers didn't capture it. Numbers never did. But they were enough to make people look twice at the dusty, blood-stained sergeant sitting in the back of the lead vehicle, her rifle cradled in her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. The vehicles pulled up to the medical facility, and Jensen was rushed inside on a gurney, doctors and nurses swarming around him with the controlled urgency that came from saving lives in a war zone. His vitals were stable. The flight medic had done good work. But he needed surgery, needed blood, needed hours of careful hands putting him back together. He'd get all of that, because Colton Brennan had bought him the time he needed. Kessler watched the medical team wheel Jensen through the doors, then turned back to where Colton was climbing stiffly out of the Humvee. Her movements were careful, controlled, but he could see the pain she was trying to hide. The shoulder injury, the exhaustion, the toll that 5 hours of high-stress combat took on a human body. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "you should get checked out too." "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Colton looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened just slightly. "After debrief, I need to report what happened up there while it's still fresh. Command can wait an hour." "No," Colton said. "They can't. There were at least 12 enemy fighters who withdrew from that peak intact. They had professional equipment, professional tactics, and they knew exactly where we'd be. That's not random. That's intelligence. Command needs to know." Kessler nodded slowly. She was right, of course. The tactical picture mattered more than one soldier's injuries, but it still didn't sit right with him. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. "You shouldn't have to brief this alone. It's not your responsibility." "Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway." Thorne appeared from the second vehicle, his own gear dusty and worn. "Make that 3 of us. This was a joint operation. We all have pieces of what happened." Colton looked between the two men, then gave a small nod. "Okay." They walked together across the base toward the operations center, a concrete building reinforced with sandbags and surrounded by multiple layers of security. Soldiers saluted as they passed. Some of them stared openly at Colton, trying to reconcile the quiet woman with the stories already circulating. The operations center was controlled chaos. Radio operators monitored multiple frequencies. Intelligence analysts studied satellite imagery on large screens. Officers moved between workstations, coordinating missions, tracking assets, making decisions that would ripple across the entire theater. A specialist at the front desk saw them coming and immediately picked up a phone. Within 30 seconds, a captain appeared from a back office. Sergeant Brennan, Petty Officer Kessler, Master Sergeant Thorne, Colonel Hayes wants to see you immediately. They followed him through a maze of corridors to a secure briefing room. Colonel Patricia Hayes was already there standing beside a large map board, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. She was 54 years old with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen 3 wars and countless smaller conflicts. She ran this base with an efficiency that bordered on ruthless. She turned as they entered. "Sit," she said, gesturing to chairs arranged around a conference table. They sat. Hayes studied them for a moment, her gaze lingering on Colton's torn uniform, the bruising visible on her shoulder, the rock dust still coating her boots. "I've read the preliminary reports," Hayes said, "but I want to hear it from you. All of it. Start from the beginning." Kessler spoke first, detailing the mission brief, the approach of the decision to leave Colton at the ridge point. His voice was steady, but there was shame underneath it. He didn't try to hide it or excuse it. Thorne covered the Ranger element's movements, the intercepted radio traffic, the decision to climb without authorization, when command ordered them to stand down. Then it was Colton's turn. She spoke quietly, methodically, walking through every detail with the precision of someone who'd been trained to observe and report. The enemy tracks she'd seen, the jam communications, the massacre scene on the summit, the 3 sniper positions, and her engagement sequence. Hayes listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Colton described the reserve force emerging from the cave and the choke point engagement, Hayes held up one hand. "Stop. You're telling me there was a cave complex on that peak large enough to hide 12-plus fighters?" "Yes, ma'am. Northeast face approximately 60 meters below the summit. Natural formation, possibly improved with some excavation work." Hayes turned to one of the intelligence analysts hovering near the door. "Pull up all satellite imagery of Peak 8100 for the past 6 months. I want every angle, every pass, every weather condition." "Yes, ma'am." Hayes turned back to Colton. "Continue." Colton detailed the rest of the engagement, the ammunition count, the enemy commander who'd observed and then withdrawn, the final tally of confirmed kills and probable hits. When she finished, the room was silent. Hayes walked to the map board and studied the topographical representation of the mountain. She traced the approach route with one finger, then marked the summit, then the bowl where the SEALs had been trapped. 14 confirmed enemy KIA, she said quietly. Another 8 probables. 3 wounded, all in 5 hours. By one shooter. She turned back to Colton. "That's not just remarkable, Sergeant. That's unprecedented. I had good terrain, ma'am, and they made mistakes. They made mistakes because you forced them to. You disrupted their plan, destroyed their coordination, and systematically dismantled their positions while under fire from multiple angles." Hayes paused. "I've been in the Army for 32 years. I've seen a lot of combat. I've never seen anything quite like this." Colton didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Hayes walked back to the table and pulled out a folder. "I received a communication from JSOC 2 hours ago. They've been tracking enemy sniper activity in this region for the past 3 months. Multiple coalition casualties attributed to what they believe is a professional sniper team operating in these mountains." She opened the folder and spread out several photographs. They showed American and British soldiers killed by precise long-range shots. The wounds were distinctive, the tactics were consistent. JSOC thinks this is the same team you engaged today, which means you just eliminated one of the most effective enemy units operating in this theater. Hayes looked directly at Colton. "That matters, Sergeant. That saves lives, not just the SEALs you pulled out today, but the soldiers who won't die next week or next month because these shooters are gone." Colton thought about the enemy commander she'd seen through her scope, the way he'd looked at her, the salute or acknowledgement or whatever it had been. "Ma'am, their commander survived. He withdrew with at least 5 fighters. He was experienced, professional. If he's part of this sniper team, he's still operational." "Noted. We'll adjust our intelligence priorities accordingly." Hayes closed the folder. "Now, let's talk about what happens next." She turned to Kessler. "Petty Officer, your after-action report will be forwarded to Naval Special Warfare Command. I expect they'll want to conduct their own investigation into the decision-making process that led to Sergeant Brennan being separated from your team." Kessler's face tightened, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am, I take full responsibility for that decision. I'm sure you do, but responsibility doesn't change outcomes. It just determines who answers for them. Hayes's voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. You're a good operator, Kessler. You've got a solid record, but you made a bad call today and it nearly cost lives. Learn from it. I will, ma'am. Hayes turned to Thorne. Master Sergeant, you deliberately violated a direct order from command when you climbed toward the peak. Yes, ma'am. Why bygones? Thorne didn't hesitate. Because the order was wrong, ma'am. We had operators in contact. Weather conditions were challenging, but not impossible. And I knew Sergeant Brennan was up there alone. He paused. Her father saved my life twice. I owed it to him to try to save hers. Hayes studied him for a long moment. You're aware that disobeying orders in a combat zone can result in court-martial? Yes, ma'am. Good, because I'm not going to court-martial you, and I want you to understand that's a choice I'm making, not a given. She leaned against the table. You were right. The order was wrong. I issued it based on incomplete information and an overly cautious assessment of the risk. Your decision to climb anyway probably saved lives, but that doesn't make it any less of a violation. I understand, ma'am. I hope you do, because next time you might not be right. Next time the order might be correct and your judgment might be flawed. And if you've established a pattern of doing whatever you think is best regardless of what command says, then you're not a soldier anymore. You're a liability. Thorne met her eyes. It won't happen again, ma'am. Unless it needs to. Hayes actually smiled at that, just a small quirk of her lips there and gone. Dismissed, Master Sergeant. Get your team to medical for evaluation and then get some rest. Thorne stood, nodded to Colton and Kessler, and left. Hayes turned her attention to Colton. Which brings us to you, Sergeant Brennan. Colton straightened slightly in her chair, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. You were ordered to hold position at a specific location. You violated that order and continued climbing. Explain. Ma'am, I heard enemy voices above my position. I attempted to report it, but communications were jammed. I assessed that the SEAL element was walking into an ambush and that I was the only friendly in position to provide warning or support. So you decided to climb into an active combat zone, alone, against an unknown number of enemy fighters. Yes, ma'am. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Colton thought about her answer carefully. Ma'am, my father used to say that courage and stupidity often look the same from the outside. The difference is whether you survive. Hayes actually laughed at that, a short, sharp sound. Tom Brennan said that to me once. We served together in Desert Storm. He was one of the finest NCOs I ever knew. Her expression sobered. He'd be proud of you today. Something tight and painful lodged itself in Colton's throat. She swallowed it down. Thank you, ma'am. Hayes walked around the table and stood directly in front of Colton. Here's what's going to happen. I'm putting you in for a Bronze Star with Valor device. Your actions today meet every criterion for recognition. You engaged a superior enemy force, you saved American lives, and you did it with a level of skill and courage that deserves formal acknowledgement. Colton started to speak, but Hayes held up a hand. I know what you're going to say, that you were just doing your job, that you don't need recognition, that medals don't matter. Hayes's voice softened slightly. But this isn't just about you, Sergeant. It's about every other soldier who gets dismissed or underestimated or left behind because they don't fit someone's narrow idea of what a warrior looks like. Your story matters, and whether you want it to or not, it's going to be told. She pulled something from her pocket, a small velvet box. This is a Purple Heart. You were wounded in action. That qualifies you immediately. She opened the box, revealing the distinctive purple and gold medal. I'm authorized to award this on the spot. Consider yourself decorated, Sergeant. Colton stood as Hayes pinned the medal to her dusty uniform. It felt heavy, heavier than it should. Ma'am, One more thing, Hayes interrupted. I received a communication from the Sergeant Major of the Army this afternoon. Apparently someone at JSOC has been following your career with interest. They're recommending you for assessment and selection into a specialized unit. Colton blinked. Ma'am, they don't tell me which unit. They never do. But reading between the lines, I'd say someone thinks you'd be a good fit for high-level sniper operations. Maybe instruction, maybe something more operational. Hayes closed the metal box. It's not an order, it's an opportunity. You can decline if you want, but I'd encourage you to at least hear them out. The room felt too small suddenly, too close. I'll think about it, ma'am. Good. Now get yourself to medical. That shoulder needs proper treatment. And Brennan. Yes, ma'am. Off the record, Hayes's formal command presence slipped just for a moment, revealing something more human underneath. I'm sorry we failed you today. Command should have taken your warning seriously. We should have had better intelligence. We should have protected you better. She paused. You deserve better than what you got. Colton didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. Hayes stepped back, returning to her role as base commander. Dismiss, Sergeant, and get some sleep. You've earned it. Colton saluted, turned, and walked out of the briefing room. Kessler was waiting in the hallway. How bad? He asked. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, possible recruitment offer from someone above my pay grade. Kessler whistled low. Damn. They walked together toward the medical facility, neither speaking for a while. Finally, Kessler said, I meant what I said earlier. We were wrong about you, and I'm going to make sure my team understands what that cost. Don't be too hard on them, Colton said quietly. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after. Is that what your father taught you? No, that's what I learned watching him fix his own mistakes. Colton glanced at Kessler. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. But he tried to be better every day. That's all any of us can do. They reached the medical facility and Kessler held the door open for her. For what it's worth, he said. I hope you take that recruitment offer. Whoever they are, they'd be lucky to have you. Colton stepped inside where Blackwell was waiting with a medical kit and a disapproving expression. Took you long enough, the medic grumbled. Get on the table. Let's see how bad you damaged yourself being a hero. The medical examination took 40 minutes. Blackwell confirmed his field diagnosis, severe contusion of the left shoulder, partially torn rotator cuff, deep tissue bruising. Nothing that required surgery, but enough to put her on light duty for at least 2 weeks. He also found and treated a dozen smaller injuries she hadn't mentioned. Scraped knuckles from climbing, a deep cut on her right palm from repositioning over sharp rock, bruises across her ribs from the rifle's recoil. You're a mess, Blackwell said, wrapping her shoulder in a proper compression bandage. How you kept shooting with this injury, I have no idea. Didn't have much choice. There's always a choice, you just made the hard one. He finished the bandage and stepped back. Okay, you're patched up. Now go eat something and get at least 8 hours of sleep. That's not a suggestion, it's a medical order. Colton slid off the examination table, testing her shoulder's range of motion. It hurt, but it was manageable. Thanks, Doc. Don't thank me. Just don't do anything stupid for the next 2 weeks. Let yourself heal. She walked out of the medical facility into the cool night air. The base was quieter now, most soldiers already in their bunks or on guard duty. The stars were brilliant, overhead, undimmed by light pollution, the same stars she'd seen from the summit hours ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. She made her way to the female enlisted barracks, a long concrete building with narrow windows and heavy doors. Inside, the hallway was dim and quiet. Most of her bunkmates were already asleep. Colton made it to her bunk and sat down heavily, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her rifle lay across her lap. She picked it up, checking it one more time, even though she'd already cleared it 3 times since coming off the mountain. Muscle memory, ritual, the things that kept soldiers sane. She thought about her father, about the last time she'd seen him alive, standing in their Montana driveway before his deployment, this same rifle slung over his shoulder. Take care of the place while I'm gone, he'd said. I will. And Colt, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. You're a Brennan. We don't quit. She'd nodded, too choked up to speak. He'd climbed into the truck that would take him to the airport, to the transport to Afghanistan, to the IED that would end everything. Colton ran her fingers over the rifle stock, feeling the worn wood, the small nicks and scratches that told a story of 2 wars and countless miles. I didn't quit, Dad, she whispered. I never quit. She carefully set the rifle in its storage position and lay back on her bunk, still fully dressed, too tired to change. Sleep came fast and hard, dragging her under like a riptide. And in her dreams, she was back on the mountain, but this time her father was there beside her, showing her the right hold, the right breathing, the right way to make the shot that mattered. She woke 6 hours later to someone shaking her shoulder gently. "Brennan, wake up." She opened her eyes to find a specialist standing over her bunk, looking nervous. "What is it?" "Colonel wants to see you, says it's important." Colton sat up wincing as her shoulder protested. "Now." "5 minutes ago, actually." She seemed pretty urgent about it. Colton grabbed her uniform top and pulled it on, ignoring the stiffness in her joints, and headed back to the operations center. Hayes was in her office this time, not the briefing room. She looked up as Colton entered and gestured to a chair. "Sit, we've got a problem." Colton sat. Hayes pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen so Colton could see it. Satellite imagery, the mountain peak, multiple angles. "My analysts spent all night going through 6 months of surveillance data on that peak. They found something interesting." She clicked to a different image. "This is from 3 weeks ago." The image showed the same peak but with visible activity, small figures moving around the summit, what looked like construction or excavation work. "They've been preparing that position for at least a month," Hayes said, "digging out the cave complex, positioning supplies, setting up ambush points." She clicked to another image. And here's the interesting part. This image was zoomed in on a group of fighters near the cave entrance. Even through the satellite resolution, Colton could make out distinctive features. Equipment that didn't match standard enemy issue. Tactics that suggested professional military training. Hayes clicked to another series of images. And here's where it gets complicated. This image showed radio intercepts, encrypted communications, timestamps that made Colton's blood run cold. "Our signals intelligence picked up enemy chatter about the mission 12 hours before you even left the base," Hayes said quietly. 12 hours. They knew the route, they knew the timing, they knew the force composition. Colton leaned forward. "How is that possible, ma'am? The mission was classified." "That's what I asked." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Turns out someone in the chain of command flagged this operation as a potential opportunity. Not for what we told you it was routine overwatch, but as bait." "Bait." JSOC has been trying to draw out this professional sniper team for months. Multiple coalition casualties, high-value targets. They needed to force the enemy into the open. Hayes closed the laptop screen. "So they designed a mission that looked like easy pickings, limited force, predictable route, minimal air support due to weather." The implications settled over Colton like ice water. "The SEALs were bait," she said slowly. "You sent them up there knowing the enemy might be waiting." "Not me. I didn't know until this morning when I started asking questions about why the intel was so catastrophically wrong." Hayes's voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "But someone higher up the chain made that call, and they didn't tell the operators on the ground." "That's," Colton searched for words, "that's using soldiers as expendable assets." "That's one way to put it. Another way is acceptable risk in pursuit of strategic objectives." Hayes's expression made it clear what she thought of that justification. "The problem is nobody planned for you. You weren't supposed to be there. You were supposed to stay at the ridge point where you'd be safe." Colton thought about the 13 hours on that mountain, the enemy fighters, the desperate fight to save men who'd abandoned her. "If I hadn't been there, they'd all be dead," Hayes finished. "Jensen for sure, probably half the SEAL team. And JSOC would be writing after-action reports about how the mission successfully identified enemy positions even though it cost American lives." The colonel walked back to her desk and sat down heavily. "This doesn't leave this room, Sergeant. I'm still investigating who authorized this and how high it goes. But I needed you to know the truth. You saved those men from more than just an ambush. You saved them from being sacrificed on an altar of intelligence gathering." Colton felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not anger, something colder. "What happens now, ma'am?" "Now I document everything. I send reports up the chain, and then probably nothing happens because the people who made these decisions outrank me by several pay grades." Hayes met Colton's eyes. "But you deserve to know that what you did wasn't just brave. It was necessary. Because command failed those men, and you were the only one who didn't." JSOC ran these images through their database, Hayes continued. "They got a hit. 3 of these fighters matched known profiles for foreign contractors. Mercenaries. Professionals being paid very well to operate in this region. They weren't just waiting for us, Colton said slowly. They were waiting for someone specific. That's our assessment, which raises the question, how did they know we'd be there? The mission was classified. The route was planned only 48 hours in advance. The timing should have been unpredictable. Hayes leaned back in her chair. Someone told them we were coming. The implications of that settled over the room like a cold fog. You think there's a leak, Colton said. I think there's something, maybe a leak, maybe compromised communications, maybe just very good enemy intelligence. Hayes closed the laptop. But until we figure out what and where, I can't trust standard operations security protocols, which is why I'm telling you this directly instead of putting it in a report. What do you need from me, ma'am? I need you to think back over everything you saw on that mountain. Every detail, equipment, tactics, communications, anything that might tell us who these people were and who they were working for. Colton closed her eyes, pulling up the memories. The summit, the enemy positions, the reserve force. The commander I saw, she said slowly, the one who withdrew, he had a distinctive rifle, not standard AK or Dragunov, something Western, maybe a Remington 700 or similar precision platform. Could you identify it from photographs? Maybe, if the resolution is good enough. Hayes made a note. What else? Their radio discipline was excellent. They were using encrypted communications, probably frequency hopping. That's not typical for enemy forces in this region. That's professional military or intelligence-grade equipment. Noted. Anything else? Colton thought harder, pulling details from the chaos of combat. When the reserve force came out of the cave, they moved in a specific formation. Two-man teams with overlapping fields of fire. That's not something you pick up from tribal warfare or insurgent training. That's professional infantry tactics, probably Eastern European or Russian doctrine. Hayes looked up sharply. Russian or Chechen, maybe Georgian, someone trained in former Soviet military systems. Colton opened her eyes. And there's one more thing. When I engaged them at the choke point, they tried to climb the rock walls to escape the kill zone. That's an advanced tactical response. Most fighters would either charge through or retreat back. Climbing under fire requires training and discipline. Hayes was writing quickly now. This is good, Sergeant. This is exactly the kind of analysis we need. She finished her notes and looked up. I'm going to pass this to the intelligence section. They'll want to debrief you more formally, probably with JSOC participation. Yes, ma'am. One last thing. Hayes's expression shifted, becoming more personal. Off the record, how are you holding up? The question caught Colton off guard. I'm fine, ma'am. That's what everyone says, right up until they're not fine. Hayes stood and walked to her office window, looking out at the base. I've seen a lot of soldiers come through here. Some of them process combat just fine. Others carry it with them for years. There's no shame in either outcome. But you need to be honest with yourself about which one you are. Colton thought about the dreams, about waking up on the mountain with her father beside her, about the feeling of the rifle bucking against her shoulder 14 times, each shot ending a life. I don't know yet, ma'am. Fair answer. Hayes turned back to her. The offer still stands. If you want to talk to someone, chaplain, counselor, or just someone who's been there, my door is open. Anytime. Thank you, ma'am. Hayes waved her hand dismissively. Now get out of here. You're supposed to be resting, not getting interrogated by me. Colton stood, saluted, and left. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Medical check-ins, brief conversations with her unit, avoiding the stares and whispered conversations that followed her everywhere she went. By evening, she'd had enough of the base and its confined spaces. She needed air, space, something that didn't feel like a cage. She walked to the perimeter, to a section of the fence that looked out over the valley toward the mountains. The same mountains where everything had changed. She wasn't alone. Thorne stood there, his own rifle slung over his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of orange and gold. Figured I'd find you here, he said without turning. Colton walked up beside him. Needed some space. I know the feeling. Thorne glanced at her. How's the shoulder? Sore, but functional. That's Rangers for you. We don't break easy. He smiled slightly. Your father was the same way. I saw him get shot in the leg during a firefight in Kandahar. He tied a tourniquet, finished the engagement, and then only then called for a medic. He never told me that story. He never told you a lot of stories. He didn't like talking about his own bravery, preferred to let his actions speak. Thorne paused. You're like him that way. Yesterday you could have told those SEALs exactly how wrong they were. Could have demanded apologies. Could have made them crawl. That's not who I am. I know, which is why you're going to be a great leader someday. Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Your father kept a journal. Did you know that? No. Most Rangers don't, but he did. Said it helped him process things, make sense of the chaos. Well, Thorne opened the notebook. He gave this to me right before his last deployment. Told me if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you were ready. He held it out to her. Colton took it with trembling hands. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. Her father's handwriting filled every line, small and precise. I think you are ready now, Thorne said quietly. Colton opened to a random page and read, Today, Colton turned 18. She's talking about joining the Army. Part of me wants to tell her no to keep her safe, to protect her from this life. But I know that's not fair. This is who she is. A warrior, just like her old man. She'll be better than me. I can see it already. She's got the skill, the discipline, and something I never had the wisdom to know, that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the job anyway. I'm proud of her. I hope I live long enough to tell her that. Colton's vision blurred. She closed the notebook carefully and held it against her chest. Thank you, she whispered. He was proud of you before yesterday, Thorne said. But if he could see what you did on that mountain, there wouldn't be words big enough. They stood together in silence, watching the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Finally, Thorne spoke again. Hayes told me about the recruitment offer. Are you going to take it? I don't know. What do you think I should do? Think you should do what your gut tells you, but if you want my opinion, Thorne turned to face her. Think you've got skills that could save a lot of lives if they're used in the right places, and I think your father would want you to use them. He would, Colton agreed quietly. Then there's your answer. Thorne placed a hand on her good shoulder. Whatever you decide, know this, you are always welcome in the Ranger community. You proved yesterday that you've got what it takes. The tab on your father's beret, you earned that. No one can take it away. I'm not a Ranger Master Sergeant. You are where it counts. He tapped his chest over his heart. In here, and that's the only place that matters. He walked away, leaving Colton alone with the sunset and her father's journal, in a future that suddenly seemed much bigger than she'd imagined. She opened the journal again, flipping through the pages, reading his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. On the last page, he'd written something different. Not a journal entry, a letter. Colt, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you become the woman I know you'll be. But I want you to know something important. You don't have to follow my path. You don't have to be a soldier. You don't have to carry this rifle, or this burden, or this legacy. But if you choose to, and I think you will, because you're as stubborn as your old man, then remember this. Being a warrior isn't about how many enemies you kill. It's about how many friends you bring home alive. It's not about being fearless. It's about being terrified and still showing up. It's not about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time, no matter how hard you've been hit. And most importantly, it's not about proving anything to anyone else. It's about being true to who you are, even when the whole world doubts you. I love you, Colt. I always will. Make me proud. But more importantly, make yourself proud. Dad. Colton closed the journal and looked up at the mountains one last time. I made us both proud, Dad, she said to the empty air. At least for today. And somewhere in the wind moving through the valley, she could almost hear his answer. That's my girl. She turned and walked back toward the base, toward her future, toward whatever came next. The rifle on her shoulder felt lighter than it had in years. And for the first time since her father's funeral, Colton Brennan smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because she finally understood what he'd been trying to teach her all along. Mountains didn't care who you were. They only cared what you could do. And she had proven beyond any doubt exactly what she could do. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Colton Brennan stood at the front of a classroom at Fort Benning Sniper School. 32 students sat before her. 4 of them were women. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same wariness she'd carried onto that C-130 half a year ago, the same readiness to prove themselves against a world that doubted them. Colton unslung her M24 and held it across her chest. "My name is Staff Sergeant Brennan," she said quietly. "And the first thing you need to understand is this: mountains don't forgive mistakes. Neither do bullets. Neither does this course." She walked along the front rank. "6 months ago, I was left behind on a mountainside because a team thought I'd slow them down, thought I was dead weight." She paused. "They were wrong, but I didn't prove them wrong with words. I proved them wrong when 12 men were dying, and I was the only one who could help." One of the female students raised her hand. "Staff Sergeant, how do you deal with people who doubt you?" Colton met her eyes. "You don't. You let your work speak. The rifle doesn't care who's holding it. The target doesn't care who's shooting. And the mission doesn't care about anyone's opinions." She returned to the center of the room. "You're going to be doubted in your careers. That's going to happen, and you can't stop it. What you can control is your skills, your discipline, and your willingness to do the job even when nobody believes you can." Colton slung her rifle back across her shoulder. "This course has a 63% failure rate. More than half of you won't graduate. But I promise you this: if you fail, it won't be because I doubted you. It'll be because the standard is the standard, and either you meet it or you don't." She dismissed the class and watched them file out. Thorne appeared at her elbow. "Good speech. Your father would be proud." "Think so?" "I know so." That evening, Colton walked alone to the long-range shooting facility. The range was empty, the target standing silent in the fading light. 800 meters down a range, a steel silhouette had been stenciled with a single word in white paint: doubt. She settled into position behind her M24, breathing controlled, heart rate steady. The same fundamentals her father had taught her on a Montana ridgeline 20 years ago. Range 800 meters, wind negligible, temperature 68 degrees. She ran the calculations automatically, her mind the same precision instrument it had been on that frozen mountain. In, out, in, out. The crosshairs settled on the word doubt. Colton squeezed the trigger. The rifle punched back against her shoulder. 800 meters away, the steel rang like a bell. Dead center. She lowered the rifle and smiled. Thorne's voice came from behind her. "How many shots?" "One." Of course it was. He walked up beside her, looking at the target. "Your father used to say that doubt dies with the first perfect shot." He was right. They stood together in the fading light, watching the sun paint the Georgia sky in shades of gold. "JSOC is still asking about you," Thorne said quietly. "Tell them I'll think about it. Right now, this is where I need to be. Training the next generation. Passing on what he taught me. What we both taught me." Colton secured her rifle. "The legacy matters more than any single mission." Thorne nodded. "Tom said almost those exact words once." They walked together back toward the main base, the rifle clean, and secured the evening air cool against their faces. Behind them, the target marked doubt stood silent in the gathering darkness, a perfect hole dead center, where Colton Brennan had proven one more time exactly what she could do. And somewhere in the wind moving through the Georgia pines, if you listened carefully, you might hear an old ranger's voice, proud and eternal. "That's my girl."